Casey Neistat revolutionized internet vlogging by bringing a higher standard quality of content to the table. A staple of any Casey Neistat vlog is the time-lapse, which he uses both to further the narrative or set the time of day. But how exactly does he shoot his time-lapses? Items needed include big tripod, small tripod, zoom lens, battery, iPhone holder, SD card, and camera. That camera is going to have to be a DSLR, by the way. I'm currently using mine to record this shot. A zoom lens with a minimum focal length of 135mm at the lowest is recommended so that we can get the same look as Casey does in a lot of his time lapses. And we're going to need a memory card, a big memory card, because rather than using the traditional picture time lapse, Casey uses video to capture his time lapses. And that means files, big files, really big files. And although this method sacrifices some quality, it allows some additional flexibility with the footage. Say if anything really interesting happened during the time-lapse, the footage could then be used at regular speed for that part. And it cuts down on the tedious editing involved in traditional picture time-lapses where more post-production editing and time is required. The building shot. So how did I shoot that? The first thing we want is a tall building. I used the tallest condo in Toronto as my subject, the Aura, which is a pretty new building and it sits at 78 stories in height. But you can also use a much smaller building with the right angle. We also want a tree in the foreground, and if we want that tree to be a bit more blurry than the background, we want to use a lower aperture. An aperture of 5.6 to 10 will create the right depth of field to make that tree a little bit more blurry. And we need a day with some clouds, so check the weather. So remember, when you're composing your shot, you want to always make it worthy of a picture. That's how I like to set up my shots. If I think that this is worthy of a picture, it's probably going to look good in a time lapse. Now let's get into the technical settings. This video is currently being shot with a 50 shutter speed at 24 frames per second, 10 aperture and 100 ISO, and I am zoomed in to about 175 millimeters, and that's my shot over there. And I'm sitting in front of my camera because it's such a far focal length. I don't want the wind to move the camera at all. Myself as a wind blocker. Always remember to shoot in manual mode when shooting any time lapses. This is to prevent flicker. Here's an example of what I mean. So basically, you want the camera to be making no decisions with the exposure when you're actually filming your time lapse. So you want all your settings set up before you hit the record button so that nothing changes and you get a nice smooth looking end result. Also, make sure that you use manual focus so that the focus doesn't randomly change during the shot, or you can also lock your autofocus. And last but not least, make sure that you have a tripod that is sturdy and stable and won't get blown around by the wind, because with any far zoomed in time lapse, even the smallest movement is gonna create a really noticeable shake during the actual shot.
Such a sweet talker, you know how to get what you want. Now don't you, darling?
The traffic shot.
Is there anything in life more satisfying than that feeling when you're playing brilliantly?
Hold on, I gotta get high.
Phenomenal.
This is how I shot this time lapse here.
Is there anything in life more satisfying than that feeling when you're playing brilliantly?
Hold on, I gotta get high.
Phenomenal.
this is how I shot that. It was shot with a frame rate of 24 and a shutter speed of 50, an aperture of 11, and an ISO of 100. I only shot for about 10 minutes because with traffic time lapses, if you speed it up too quickly, it actually begins to look weird, so you don't need that much footage. I tried to compose the shot so that I could get in the really nice fall tree colors and the tall buildings in the background, as well as most of the crosswalks, so I thought it turned out really well. The key to this kind of time lapse is finding a spot where the traffic is coming right at you, but you're not actually going to get hit by a car. So something like this on the road where I can find a spot to put my camera, but I won't get hit by a car. I get a shot where it looks like I'm kind of standing right in the middle of the road. The crowd shot. I shot that with a pylon in front of my tripod so that any cyclist going up the street would go around the tripod, and also so that cars would avoid it as well and stay as far away from it as possible, because the last thing I need is for my camera to get hit by a car. I shot it with an FPS of 24, a shutter speed of 320, an aperture of 5.6, an ISO of 100, and a focal length of 210mm. You could also use an ND filter to shoot it at the ideal shutter speed of 50, but I find that even with a 320 shutter speed, it turned out looking fine, so you don't actually need a neutral density filter. For this type of shot, all you have to do is find a crowded area where lots of people are walking, and to get that blurry effect in the foreground, you want to use an aperture of about 5.6, and then you want to be focused about halfway down the street so that when people actually get your camera, they're out of focus because of that depth of field that you get from the 5.6 aperture. The landscape shot. I can't remember what my settings were when I took this shot. It was from back in May, but if I had to take a guess, it would be 100 ISO with a frame rate of 24 and a shutter speed of 50, and then an aperture of around 11. The key to sunset and sunrise time lapses where there is a lot of lighting changes is to pick the settings that will expose your shot well throughout a portion of the sunset or sunrise. For a sunset, I like to start a little overexposed so that as it gets darker and the sun goes down, I can still see, and a wider aperture is ideal for that, so pick an aperture between maybe 3.5 and 5.6. This will get you about 15 minutes of footage that is exposed well and will look great in a time lapse. For sunrises, do the opposite. Start a little underexposed so that as the sun rises, the shot will end up having good exposure, and then maybe you want a little bit higher of an aperture of around 10 or 11. Landscape shots are ideal for smartphone time lapses, but only if the lighting is consistent. The camera on a smartphone will make a great daylight time lapse in a landscape scenario, but there is too much flicker in sunset or sunrise time lapses to use a smartphone, in my opinion. But at the end of the day, what is the point of capturing a time lapse? I think it's a great way to show the beauty in the world around us. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section. Oh shit.